Hi everyone, Acesup here for Poker. Thanks for joining me again for this heads-up battle of the ages between Justin Bonomo and Michael ADDAMO. There's been great action. It's the super high roller bowl on GG Poker, and we just saw Justin Bonomo empty the clip. He actually delayed c-bet the turn and then 4 times pot shoved the river with the 8 high. It was something that we saw GTO will do at frequency, and that's been pretty consistent with how these guys have been playing, isn't it? They've been following along pretty closely to a GTO style of play, and that's certainly led to a lot of learning, because you don't always see the 8 high 4 times pot all in. Don't see it that often, do you? So yeah, we've seen some great plays by these guys, and we're going to continue to follow along now. In the next hand, 10 jack, offsuit on the button, standard open here. Jack 8 off, going to be a defend for ADDAMO. I think Bonomo could certainly c-bet, could certainly check. Doesn't have too much to protect against, but does have pretty good equity with middle pair, backdoor flush, backdoor straight. Does decide to check it back. I think that's actually probably better against ADDAMO to do a little bit more checking with some of these hands. Having said that, of course, we know in this particular instance, ADDAMO does have middle pair and would have probably called a couple of streets. Definitely going to value bet now on the river. Question is what size. He goes large. It's interesting that we've seen the check from Bonomo now. He's got a couple of options. He could just call, or he could go for thin value and raise. He does go for the value, and it's quite large, isn't it? It's gone from 2.8 BB to 9.3, the 700k to 2.3 million. I think this particular hand blocking the straight, he can get away with it, and he does get paid off. So a fairly sort of suspicious call there by ADDAMO. What would check and then raise a bet on the river, and he does pay it off. Probably okay with the middle pair. We've seen the limp here with the 9s and the 2-bet with the jacks. Now it'll be interesting to see if Bonomo just calls here. I suspect he will. Okay, he does. So let's just stop it for a moment. So you might be thinking, why would 9s just call when we've only got 10 BB left? And it's basically, again, and something we've been tracking, is a lot of the times the plays that are made here are a function of what the ranges look like. And because these players play at a very high level, they're quite aware of how the ranges look and how they should proceed. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we take a look here at the ranges at the start of this hand, so we were... let me just pop back for a minute. You know, we're in the vicinity of sort of 12-ish bigs, right? So that being the case with 12-ish bigs, if we have a look here, 12 big blinds, a small blind strategy looks like this. So there's a lot of limping. Those raw equity sort of pairs and ace-x's, prefer to just jam and take it down. You know, of course, there's still going to be lots of profitable hands to jam. You know, king jacks and suited connectors and, you know, your other ace highs and, you know, some king highs and whatever. Certainly all going to be profitable. But from a GTO point of view, of course, we're trying to see a lot of flops. From the small blind, we're getting a really good price. And to balance out with that, we're going to have to mix in a lot of strong hands. If we start limping too much weak stuff, it's going to be very easy to exploit, which is why we see so much limping and so many strong hands contained in the limping range at 12 big blinds. Now, that being the case, based off that range, you can see that the big blind's response after seeing a small blind call is to shove with the ace-x's and the small pairs again. And of course, you know, whenever I say that, you can always expect to see a spluttering of other hands like 5-6 suited and your queen 2 suited and some, you know, king x's and queen x's in there. As it's GTO after all, it mixes things up. But you also see this raising range. And you can see that the raising range that doesn't shove is hands that are sort of really strong, like 8s plus. Or you've got these bluffs in here. 10-6, 10-5, 4-8, 5-2, maybe a little 6-7, 5-6 sprinkling. So now you imagine you have 9s in this instance. What would you want to do? Well, the thing is, if you get 2-bet here and shove 9s based off this, you know, light orangey range, I mean, you're either flipping or crushed. So I think Bonomo being aware of this dynamic, we can expect to see flat in this instance quite a lot. Of course, recreational players are just going to say, hey, I have pocket 9s, we're short, I'm shoving all in. But at this high level, we're going to see, I think, a lot of detours of that sort of more exploitative thinking. And again, we're probably going to see the GTO approach here. He might make a liar of me now and shove Bonomo, but he does make the call. And so this is the sort of flop I was talking about. Now, obviously, we see that ADDAMO has the jacks. It's a cooler situation. Nothing can be done. But having said that, let's imagine now for a moment that ADDAMO did have the 4-8. And ideally not the 5-2, because that would have flopped the second nuts. But, the 6-8, the 4-8, the 4-9, sort of one of those more junky sort of two-betting hands. He now would have to stack off, and nines would have got it in a really nice situation. As it was a cooler anyway. If he had a shove pre, he would have been cooled by jacks anyway. But he gave his opponent the option to connect in some way on the board with a short stack that's going to have to commit in a situation where he's potentially going to be a pretty big favourite. So I like the way he managed, even with a short stack there. I like the way he operated. Tried to let his opponent get in there with a worse hand, but it's just unfortunate that he had jacks in that instance. Here we see a limp with the Queen 9. And obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but mostly I think we'll see a raise here by Bonomo, and we do. The small raise on the monotone board is good. Generally small bets and small raises on the monotone boards. ADDAMO with top pairs in a pretty tricky spot here. Now this is interesting. If we imagine Bonomo's check raising range, it's going to be quite full of straight draws and flush draws and well-made hands as well. So this does put, that's 1.5 million there. So it's a 3/4 pot size bet. And ADDAMO just folds the 9 there, which is interesting. I think that the jack, though, does connect reasonably well. You can expect to see some jack 8, 10 jack, some flushes, some 2 pairs. A lot of other straight draws that are going to have good equity against Queen 9 without a heart. So it's good fold by ADDAMO. Very good fold. On the turn to be folding already in that instance. But anyway, we move along. King 7. Raise pre and 5-7 off defending, of course, pretty standard. We could see bet on this board or check. He does opt to check. We pick up a double belly here in position, ADDAMO. A queen or an 8 will give us a straight. King high still sometimes the best hand. I think it was raise pre, wasn't it? Was raise pre, yeah. So that being the case, I think this is probably a check back by Michael ADDAMO, but being the sick one that he is, he could look for some really thin. That is thin. That is one of the thinnest value bets I've ever seen in my life. And he gets paid off, of course, in this instance. But, I mean, this is raised pre, so you've got to be careful here. We've seen Bonomo capable of checking, GTO capable of checking, slow playing hands, allowing for multiple options on the later streets. I mean, we did just see Bonomo check flop, check turn, raise a value bet on the river with middle pair. So I think this is probably too thin. I mean, ADDAMO is assuming that Bonomo has, some 6x, that, he hasn't bet obviously on the flop and the turn. He gets to the river, checks again, some 6x, maybe some 7x. But there's just, it's pretty close. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty close. It is quite thin. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to open the PO on it, but it must be pretty close. But he has got away with a lot of those thin value bets, hasn't he? And been paid off each time. So he is definitely a beast with those value bets. I'll tell you what, thin value betting is Mr. ADDAMO's specialty. And here we see him 2-bet with the Jack Queen suited, pretty standard. But around 30 big blinds here, and the King 3-3 flop. I imagine we'll see a very small bet here. 1.6 BB looks good. And this is just a function of, this board is so dry, we may as well bet really small and try and keep in the types of hands that we see Bonomo has, like a Jack 9 with a heart or a 5-6 with a heart. Some of that sort of stuff. I don't know how deep into his range Bonomo will reach pre-flop facing the 2-bet, but some sort of cards that wrap around the king or the 3, like a 4-5, 5-6 or a 10 Jack, Jack 9 with a heart are probably going to have to continue against such a small bet. And so I think from ADDAMO's thinking, it's just a very sort of small value-ish type bet. And I don't think he'll be able to fold here, to be honest. You notice Bonomo's gone really large here, and this is probably okay with this specific holding. He's pretty far down in his range. But he's not ripping a lot, obviously, which is why he's gone quite large. He's going to have a little bit of King X. He's going to have a little bit of 7X, a few other weird hands. But, yeah. ADDAMO sort of snuffed that one out. I think the Jack Queen call there is pretty good. Seems okay the way it was played. Tiny flop bet and then check, just call river. Bit unfortunate here for ADDAMO. He's gone for the limp. We see the 2-bet isolation. We only have a 12-ish BB stack again. This is probably a fold here from ADDAMO. I'm a little bit surprised he's called it. Let's just have a quick look. I'm not sure 7-9 off is going to be a hand that calls 12 bigs. So small blind limping. We've got the 9-7 limp, and then against that limp, naturally we get kings. We're at 12 bigs, right? So it's actually a lot of these hands are just shoving. If we pop down to 16, you see the 9-7 here mostly limping, and then against that we see the kings just raising. So more shoving at 12 BB. Bonomo actually just goes for the raise, and if we do look at a raising strategy, which is slightly deeper, 16 bigs, then for the big blind, for the small blind, after calling and seeing the BB raise, we see the 9-7 is actually a fold, it looks like. We're in the right spot here, 16 big blinds, so small blind limps, big blind pots it. Wasn't quite a pot size bet, I don't think, but I think the 9-7 off should probably be folding here. This is at 16 bigs though, remember? We're closer to 12 bigs. I think 12 bigs, the non-all-in like 2-bet range looks even stronger, I think. So I would definitely be ditching the 9-7 off here, and GTO would as well. A little bit surprised that ADDAMO continues with it. It might be because he's from more of a cash game background. And we are also a little bit closer to 12 bigs as well, which, you know, if we have a look after a small blind call. Small blind strategy, 12 bigs. Again, the raw equity hands jamming. We see tons of limping. Small blind call, big blind strategy against the limp is to jam the raw equity hands with a few of those bluffs, and yeah, just raising the kings and then following up from that. So small blind call, big blind raise, small blind strategy. This is at 12 bigs now, right? So we're jumping from, just to be clear, small blind strategy, ADDAMO. So he's got 970 limps. After he limps, this is a strategy that should be deployed by Bonomo. In this instance, he has the kings and he raises. And so after the small blind calls, and then we see a pot size raise. It's probably slightly under pot. BB strategy is to mostly fold the 9-7 at 12 bigs. We saw it deeper as well, so I think this is a bit of a misstep. You see there is a slither of calling there. This is interesting. So, you know, Bonomo never too far away from the GTO. So maybe he's just RNG'd it and got like a 95 and said, hey, I have to continue this time with this hand. And unfortunately for him, he's flopped a pair. So, I mean, you know, I just think at this point in the tournament, you've got your opponent down to, you know, quite an epic battle. You've got him down to 10 bigs, and you've got this really marginal hand with 7-9 against a range that could easily be overly nutty, 2-betting off a sort of 12 big blind stack. It's easy to say when we see that Bonomo has kings and the board's run out this way, he's going to get 3 streets of value and double up. Now he's bet beautifully and only left himself with sort of a quarter pot size bet on the river. He's played it wonderfully and got the right run out as well to get him paid, because I don't think ADDAMO can really fold getting these odds. And you got to remember too, if we, you know, just think back for a moment. I won't open the ranges again, but you know, there's going to be a few bluffy type hands in there as well that Bonomo will still have. So can't fault ADDAMO too much for calling down, but that pre-flop call definitely close. So now we're up to sort of 16, just over 16 bigs again. We see ADDAMO with the ace-5 suited limp, looks good. Can limp these suited aces off this stack depth. And so yeah, it's about 17 bigs here. We see 8-10 off, go for the 2-bet. Again, I'm not too sure what sort of frequency this will happen. So we said about 17 bigs, right? So if we look at 16 bigs, we do see the suited aces, the wheel aces, do a lot of limping from the small blind, and then against the limping, yeah, we do see the 8-10. It will just actually shove sometimes. It doesn't actually 2-bet, which I think is interesting, off 16 bigs. If we have a look at 20 bigs, we'll have a look at the small blind. So again, ace-5 mostly limping. There's a little bit of raising as we get a bit deeper. And at 20 bigs, the the big blind against the small blind call. 8-10, again, mostly shoving. And, there's, I guess, a tiny slither if you really squint in there of just non-all-in 2-betting. Now, someone out there might be thinking, well, why would you shove 8-10? But again, just remember that principle of efficiency. The hands that you're trying to get to fold here, if you just pop up to 16 bigs, because that's a better, I think, replicates sort of what we're looking at a bit better since we're around this size. We've got 17 bigs. So after the small blind limps this range here in green, then the big blind's response is this. And Bonomo is just 2-bet, so he doesn't shoved. 7-10 just raises. 6-10 just raises. So essentially, if we just focus on the all-ins for a moment, you've got mostly your raw equity hands, small pairs and ace-x's. Since you've only got 16 bigs, happy to take the pot down with raw equity. You've got some strong hands like ace, king and ace queen, ace jack, and ace 10 suited and king queen, etc. in this shoving range. And then what you can do is add in some bluffs like your queen 6, queen 5, king 2, but also you notice your 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 10, a jack 8. Now the reason why these work quite well and these suited connectors here, 6, 7, 8, 6, is because after we shove, if we now look at what the small blind's response is, so small blind call, BB shove, look at all these hands we fold out that are better than 8-10. King X's, Queen X's, Jack X's. All these King X's, Queen X's, and Jack X's. So we are folding a massive chunk of hands here that are actually beating us. And that is the efficiency of bluffing. And that's why it's taking some of these suited, it's mixing in some of these suited connectors, but there's still got a lot of those strong hands in there, so it's balancing its range in that way, but trying to get our opponent to make mistakes. I mean, if you have 6-7 suited or 8-10 off and jam and your opponent folds, King X, they had the best hand. They're making a pretty big mistake given the pot odds that were on offer. And so that's how you got to think about it in terms of efficiency of bluffing. And I think that's what ADDAMO is going for. Bonomo is doing here. Trying to get some folds, but he's a little bit off because 8-10 firstly would just normally shove, at least off the GTO ranges that I have. But he's not far off again, is he? Because we saw 7-10. If we just pop back, small blind call, big blind strategy, we see a lot of this Jack 7, 7, 10, 10, 6 sort of stuff. That is 2-betting. Again, just coming down to the efficiency, 7-8. So he's certainly in the ballpark again, and he's all around it. So can't fold him too much. Of course, after we see this, we expect small blind call, big blind pot, small blind strategy. We expect to see ace 5 to just call. And again, sort of leave in some of these more marginal hands at this depth, which is probably something, again, you don't see recreational players do very often. This is a sort of a more tactful sort of play in position with your suited ace. See what sort of board you get. Your opponent will have a little bit of a tricky time putting on strong hands and ace X's and be very likely to barrel off with a lot of his marginal hands. And that's really the idea behind it. In this particular instance, obviously, Bonomo has flopped massive and is just going to go for the... just rips the turn. Was a bit of a dangerous board, though. Thought with that hand that strong, he might have gone for a little bit smaller size, but it's probably fine. And obviously, ace-x had to fold. 5-10 here, opening. Looks okay. Jack-4 defend. I imagine that we will... I guess, again, we could see bet or check. I think probably with the middle pair here on a pretty drawy board, we'd probably see a little bit more betting, especially since we have such a significant range advantage. Although having said that, we don't have a very good kicker and backdoors. We're pretty vulnerable off this stack depth, so maybe we can check at the weaker 5x's at a pretty good frequency. Obviously calling turn with the middle pair. And this is interesting, isn't it? I feel like this could be a value bet by Bonomo after we see a check. It's very thin. We might see some 2x and 4x that ADDAMO bet turn. Our range is a little bit protected because we will have a little bit of 6x. So it's a little bit hard for ADDAMO to check raise us since we can call turn with a lot of 6x, which gives us a little bit more impunity to value bet thinly. And Bonomo did go for it, which was nice. 5-10. 5-10 open on the button, Jack 3 off defend. I'm just wondering what frequency that's at. Off sort of 16, 17 bigs. Just have a quick look. 16 bigs, small blind strategy. The 10-5 offsuit does just limp, so it's just outside of the realms of what raises. But I think It was offsuit, wasn't it? Yeah, but I think we saw a raise, didn't we? So again, ADDAMO just seems a little bit off. I think it could just be his cash game background. I mean, he's playing amazing, don't get me wrong. But sometimes his pre-flop's been slightly off. And he has been a cash game player in Macau for many years and sort of switched to tournaments more recently. Obviously studied up. One of the best players in the world. Arguably had the best year in 2021 online in high buy-in events. Probably not arguably, probably quite clearly. He's just on virtually every final table. Oh my, he gets the worst river here. He's just been counterfeit. I started to think that might be the end of the tournament, and then the counterfeit happens, he has to check, and BONOMO takes down a huge pot. That's big time. Wow. Okay. Limp with the 6-2 suited here. ADDAMO checks the Jack-9. Middle pair. Check. Does go for the bet with the backdoor flush and straight. Seems okay. Probably just see a call here by ADDAMO, I think. He's got the pair in the gut shot now. I think we see a BONOMO probably slow down with this combination here. I mean, just... There's just so little going. Oh, he doesn't. He does go for it. He does go for it. Obviously, ADDAMO with a pair in a gut shot is not going anywhere. And look at that. He rivers the straight this time. This time the river does work for him. I mean, of course, he had the best hand anyway, but this might be a card, I think, where BONOMO feels compelled to bluff now. The question is, what size will he go? He went pretty large, and it was just an unfortunate run out for him. We're now at 17 bigs and limps the next hand with queens. Sneaky, sneaky. Oh, and the jam by the king 5. Oh, my lord. This could be it. He has flopped the world. BONOMO has flopped the world, and just like that, the king 5 off against the queens. He's taken down the super high roller bowl for not even $2 million. Look at that. Chump change for Justin BONOMO. $2 million and just a very disappointing 1.1, well, almost 1.2 million for ADDAMO. Very impressive performance, seriously, by these guys, what we've seen, and that's very impressive results. Yeah, just incredible play. Let's just have a look at that last hand, since we have delved so deeply throughout this heads-up clash, and just see what was going on there with the king 5. I think it's okay. So we were around 16 bigs, and we saw that the queens limped, which was good. They will do that at quite a high frequency. We can see here 55% of the time. And after they limp, if we have a look at the small blind call, big blind strategy, the king 5 is in there at a slither, the king 6 a little bit more, and the king 7 a lot more. So again, sort of in the ballpark with the GTO. Did BONOMO run an RNG and roll a 95 and think this hand's supposed to jam occasionally, and 95's my high number, so I'm going to jam it. I'm not sure at what level exactly these guys are playing at with RNGs and frequencies and how well they know, or if in this instance, BONOMO would just suspect that some King X's and Queen X's can jam over a limp and did decide to go for it. That's probably more likely, but we have seen some fantastic plays by these guys, so perhaps they're operating at an even deeper level and got these ranges really well memorized. I'm not sure, but we have seen a few little mistakes along the way as well, but we can see that this play was really close. If we just drop down to 20 bigs, we can see that the queens limp around half the time still. And after that, seeing that limp, we can see that the king 5 does actually jam. So it's actually 2-betting more here, than jamming. We do see some of the queen X and a little bit of this king X here jamming at 16 against the limp. And then at 20, we do see it jamming again. So can't really fault BONOMO for jamming it here. It will do it at a frequency. Sort of 17-ish or just over bigs, I think we were. So, yeah, certainly a hand that could just shove over. And just want to see exactly the BBs again. 17.2 was the effective stack size that ADDAMO had. So, yeah, seems fine at a frequency. If you're doing it all the time, you'd be jamming too much. I suspect that BONOMO is, as we've seen, like I said, keeping his frequencies in line and just decided to do it this time. And, hey, if you can keep pressure on an opponent as dangerous as ADDAMO, who's playing as well as he is, then that's always a good thing. So yeah, it does seem fine, I think. And yeah, he just got lucky at the right time, didn't he? and it's the end of the epic duel between Justin Bonomo and Michael ADDAMO. What a game it was. Two of the top players in the world and GTO experts, I would say. So not surprisingly, for the most part, the play very closely followed a GTO strategy, as have we by analysing the play in many of the hands using PO Solver. Particularly in the previous parts with the deeper stacks, we spoke a lot about post-flop. And now this part was a good note to finish on, as we got to also discuss pre-flop ranges and GTO with the shorter stacks in play. It can be quite a different style to an exploitable one, or a style that looks to just push any equity advantage with larger bets or all-ins. It's a lot more refined, as we saw. If you would like the Rangers team, I'll leave a link below for those. Of course, you will need PO Solver, as you saw, me constantly bringing up the charts and that sort of thing. But I do, as you know, highly recommend it. There's plenty of tutorials on it, of course, if you are still just getting into PO. It's going to be a really useful tool for expanding your GTO knowledge and building on your game. Other than that, team, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this format, a little bit different. Tried to break up the heavy GTO content with a little bit of entertainment as well, as we got to sort of go through all these hands, and there were plenty of interesting ones. Lots of takeaways with the mechanics of GTO, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. This was Acesup for PokerNerve. Thanks for watching.